Hey everybody, I'm Candace Shively with Utah State University Extension and the Center for Water Efficient Landscaping, and you are watching our Water Well with CWEL webinar series. So welcome, thank you guys all for joining us. This month we are fortunate to have Ellie McGinty and Chris McGinty with USU's Remote Sensing and GIS Laboratory. And I'm pretty excited for this. If you joined us in December, we covered what WaterMAPS is. And this is going to be kind of a behind the scenes look into that. And they're also kind of going to discuss some of the other interesting projects that they've done in their lab. And again, share some of the methods that they've used to develop the high resolution land cover data sets that are used in WaterMAPS. And also just briefly touch on why urban land cover data is one of the important tools that we use when we're managing water.
All right, thanks Candace. We appreciate the opportunity to be here today. As Candace mentioned, I'm Chris McGinty. I'm Associate Director, Remote Sensing GIS Lab. And Ellie, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Ellie Leydsman McGinty, and I'm a researcher in the Remote Sensing GIS Lab. My background is in bioregional planning. I do remote sensing, GIS, a lot of cartography, and I really enjoy land cover mapping. So I'm happy to be here to give this talk today.
So Ellie's going to run the slides for us, and I'm going to give you folks a bit of an overview of some of the work that we've done at the Remote Sensing GIS Lab, a little bit about us, and then Ellie's going to take us through some of the fantastic work that she's done in support of conservation restoration and land cover mapping. And certainly the work that we've done with respect to WaterMAPS. The Remote Sensing GIS Lab's been in the College of Natural Resources since 1990. So we've been around quite a long time. Ellie and I haven't been there that long, but it's been directed in large part by Dr. Doug Ramsey in Wildland Resources. We have a fluctuating number of full-time staff. Right now, myself as Associate Director, Chris Gerard is our senior programmer. Ellie works as researcher 3 in the lab. And then we have Aubrey Burgess, who's joining us today on the listening in as one of our undergraduate technicians. And we've had a number of other undergraduate technicians that has worked with us throughout the years as projects come and go. You all understand how projects do come and go, and we're lucky to be able to lean on some of the students, graduate students, and other international researchers as well. Just a little bit of background. What you're seeing here on the screen is some moderate resolution satellite imagery, and this is what we spend a lot of our time working with. So we do a lot of work in the areas of using Landsat and Sentinel data, but also in some high resolution data, which Ellie's going to talk about in a little bit. But we have this really rich history of remote sensing and Earth observation data, which is just absolutely fantastic and allows us to do so much work looking at the change in landscape over time. And you can see there the Great Salt Lake from 1985 to 2011 through a little animation that Dr. Ramsey put together. And you can see how things change. And we capitalize on that change and are able to look at the landscape and do a lot of different types of research with this imagery. A little bit of background again, land cover and land use mapping are two terms that deserve a little bit of a mention. Land cover in the terms of, we're talking about physical cover. So what you see when you're looking out on the surface of the earth, when you're out exploring, you might see forests or you might see sagebrush. Similarly, and sometimes mixed up with land cover is land use. And so that's more of the activities or the social purposes. And they do get mixed up quite often because these two things are interchangeable. And so you might see forest and a land use for forest is, maybe recreation or it may be timber harvest. So there's two different terms here, but they can be used somewhat interchangeably. But as we go through this presentation, it's good to kind of keep those two different terms in mind. Just a couple of projects that I wanted to mention so that you guys have a background of what the Remote Sensing GIS Lab has done in the past. I won't talk too much about the impervious surface mapping there on the left, but this is a fantastic project that Ellie headed up in the lab, mapping impervious surfaces for the Wasatch Front a few years back, and it's a fantastic project that we're going to talk more about here shortly. But one of the projects I do like talking about is the Southwest Regional Gap land cover on the right, and this was a 5-state effort that was led by the Remote Sensing GIS Lab here at USU. Collected nearly 100,000 ground samples with teams out in all 5 states, and put together one of the most comprehensive land cover maps across the region that had been developed up until that point. And so it was just a fantastic opportunity. If you're interested in that, you can take a look at the southwestregap.org website there on the bottom right of the screen. A few other projects that we've worked on quite extensively is habitat modeling and mapping, and this was a very big deal and still is with respect to the greater sage grouse. We spent a lot of time working with Dr. Messmer and his folks within the College of Natural Resources and the Department of Division of Wildland Resources within the state to do sage grouse habitat mapping using a lot of different land cover and ancillary variables. Um, a few other things, invasive species modeling and mapping. We've spent a good deal of time mapping cheatgrass, which is a major component of large landscape change due to fires across the Great Basin and Colorado Plateau. So we spent a lot of time using moderate resolution imagery to capture some of these changes in vegetation types across our landscapes. And leading into that, this cheatgrass that we do map, and certainly some of the other classifications that we've done within the lab, really leads us to being able to do landscape monitoring. And some of this monitoring that's done, some work here by Lisa Lang-Stoner, one of the former employees of the lab, along the bottom, was looking at the Milford Flat Fire Complex. It was the largest fire that's ever been recorded in the state of Utah. Was significant just down there southwest of Milford, Utah, and burned some 300,000 acres in just a couple of days. And so once that was completed, the BLM and various agencies went in to do restoration, and we were able to take some of this technology and help them monitor the post-fire restoration efforts. And two more examples here, some landscape assessments that we've done for Grand Teton National Park. We headed up a natural resource condition assessment for that area, which is a fantastic opportunity to really learn about the resource condition of the park and some of the work that's been going on up there, and certainly some of the impacts to the region. And really near and dear to our heart was the Rangeland Resources of Utah, which was originally written in part by Dr. Neil West a very long time ago in the early mid 80s. We were able to take that book and rewrite it under funding from the Utah Public Lands Policy Coordination Office in 2009. Which was it's still a while back that it was done, but it's readily used all the time by many different people around the state. So fantastic opportunity to take some of this remote sensing and apply it to a resource that can be used so widely. And a lot of work that we have done is looked at disturbance mapping. So along with the sage grouse and the invasive species, we've looked at mapping disturbances for the state of Utah. A lot of this goes to support the governor's office and the work that they're doing. But there on the right, you can see that we've done carbon dynamics modeling and mapping for every national forest in the United States under funding from the USDA Forest Service. And this was a fantastic project that spanned nearly a decade. And we had the opportunity to work with many different agencies using remotely sensed data to track changes in forests that are impacting not just these local forests, but the global climate in general. And then a little bit more about what Ellie's going to be looking at. Some of this I like to call ultra high, but high resolution vegetation mapping. We've had an opportunity to work on the San Rafael, Price rivers, the Canyon de Chelly area, all to help support conservation and restoration efforts within those areas, really looking at invasive species and how these ecosystems can be locally restored. And last but not least, some of the projects that we've been working on more recently is using UAS, unmanned aerial systems or drones, for restoration. Most recently, Dr. Ramsey had a student that had worked on the Wilburg Cottonwood Mine reclamation area using unmanned aerial systems to look at the restoration efforts in some of these abandoned and reclaimed mines within the state. So what you can see is we've had a lot of opportunity to do a lot of different projects. We're really excited to be working in some of these high resolution mapping efforts now, since that's where a lot of the data is going with drones and aircraft and even better satellite platforms. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ellie to talk about the fun stuff.
Okay, so as you can see, remote sensing has many applications, and many of these applications revolve around the development of land cover and land use data. Land cover and land use data are generated using a variety of mapping methods, many of which have evolved over the years. I will briefly discuss three main approaches to land cover mapping, including manual air photo interpretation, pixel-based image classification, and object-based image analysis. The latter approach will be discussed in further detail because it provides the foundation for developing the high-resolution land cover datasets that are needed to support fine-scale restoration and conservation efforts. So first, manual air photo interpretation is a long-standing technique that has been used to study landscapes, identify objects, and extract information from aerial photos. The process of air photo interpretation is one of learning to associate the visual characteristics on air photos with real objects on the ground. Visual characteristics can include context, tone, size, shape, pattern, and texture. Air photo interpretation was initially used during wartime efforts for reconnaissance surveys. In fact, during World War II, the chief of the German General Staff stated that the nation with the best photo reconnaissance will win the war. Initially, Germany led the world in photo reconnaissance, but by 1945, the United States had the best photo interpretation capacity of any nation in the world. After World War II, aerial photography and mapping methods continued to advance. For instance, color in infrared aerial photography became an important element in identifying different vegetation types and detecting diseased and damaged vegetation. Accordingly, air photo interpretation was extensively used in farmland and forest inventories. During the 1970s and 80s, air photo interpretation techniques became the foundation for detailed wetland inventories and the first generation of nationally consistent land cover and land use maps for the United States. While manual air photo interpretation is effective and accurate, it is time-consuming, labor-intensive, and cost-prohibitive. This is evident in the length of time that it took to complete the National Wetlands Inventory. It took more than 20 years to map 90% of the lower 48 states. In the 1970s, Earth observation satellites began acquiring images of the entire Earth with the primary goal of providing data about the Earth's natural resources in a timely, effective, and economic manner. As the availability of these digital images increased over time, the demand for improved and semi-automated mapping methods grew. Accordingly, pixel-based classifiers were developed to produce land cover and land use data from these digital satellite images. In pixel-based image classification, individual image pixels are classified based on the spectral information contained within the bands or channels. Therefore, each pixel is assigned to one class. Pixel-based classifiers have become the traditional approach to satellite image classification, and over the years, several sophisticated algorithms have been implemented to develop national and regional datasets, including the National Land Cover Database and Landfire data. While pixel-based classifiers have been extremely valuable in conducting global, national, and regional studies, they are not suited for high-resolution imagery or detailed studies. When traditional pixel-based approaches are applied to high-resolution imagery, the output is frequently a less accurate and pixelated representation that exhibits what remote sensors call the salt and pepper effect. This is because single pixels no longer capture the characteristics of entire features. In other words, one feature, such as a building, is now composed of multiple pixels. The increased variability of values confuses the classifiers and often results in errors. In the example to the right, pixel-based classifiers were applied to high-resolution aerial imagery to develop land cover maps. As you can see, the outputs appear to be pixelated or speckled. The error or confusion is particularly evident in the lower example. The limitations of air photo interpretation and pixel-based classifiers prompted scientists to develop a new image classification approach called object-based image analysis. Object-based image analysis uses a combination of both geospatial and image processing concepts to extract land cover data from high-resolution imagery. The primary objectives of this approach are to replicate human interpretation of images in semi-automated ways that result in increased repeatability and decreased subjectivity and expense. Object-based image analysis accounts for many of the visual cues that humans rely on in manual air photo interpretation. The foundational process of object-based image analysis is segmentation. Segmentation, as the term suggests, segments or partitions an image into image objects, much like a jigsaw puzzle. This process aggregates the high-level detail contained within high-resolution images and converts the units of analysis from pixels to image objects. So when object-based image analysis is applied to the high-resolution aerial images shown in the previous slide, the land cover classifications become strikingly improved, the land cover types are more defined, and there is less variability and error within each class. The object-based image analysis software package that we use for high-resolution land cover mapping is called Trimble E-Cognition. It has become the leading object-based image analysis software because it is a comprehensive program that integrates imagery and a variety of other geospatial datasets. It also provides an iterative yet structured workflow that entails data integration, image segmentation, rule set development, and image classification. So to provide you with a general idea of how E-Cognition works, I've created this basic example. I opened this photo that I took at Coral Pink Sand Dune State Park in southern Utah. This is a typical digital photo that is composed of red, green, and blue channels. Each channel or band captures a different portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. For example, the red channel shows the reflected red light. Therefore, in this image, the sand is brighter in the red channel because it is reflecting more red light. By using one of the segmentation algorithms in E-Cognition, the image is segmented into objects based on spectral values. The goal of this particular segmentation algorithm is to group pixels for the purpose of minimizing the spectral variation that can often lead to error or confusion. In order to create more meaningful image objects, another segmentation algorithm can be applied. With meaningful image objects defined, classes can be identified. After classes have been identified, a set of rules can be developed to classify the image. And then in this example, a few rules were developed to classify the four main features of the digital image: the flowers, the sand, the sky, and the vegetation. So object-based image analysis can be used in a wide range of studies for restoration and conservation. In the last part of this presentation, I will talk about 3 different projects. First, high-resolution impervious surface data can be used to support watershed planning and management, as well as wetland restoration. Second, high-resolution riparian land cover data can be used to support riparian habitat restoration. And lastly, high-resolution urban land cover data can be used as an input in WaterMAPS analyses to support urban landscape water conservation. In this first example, object-based image analysis was used to develop a high-resolution land cover dataset with a specific focus on mapping and quantifying impervious surfaces. Impervious surfaces are one of the most widespread land cover types in urban and suburban environments. They include features such as roads, parking lots, and residential and commercial buildings. Through an EPA Wetland Program Development Grant, land cover data were developed for 3 watershed subbasins in northern Utah, including the Lower Barren Lands, Lower Weber, and Jordan. The goal of this multi-year project was to create a practical data set that could be used by state agencies, namely the Utah Division of Water Quality, to support watershed condition assessments and wetland restoration and conservation. The topic of impervious surfaces remains a priority to natural resource managers because impervious surfaces effectively sill surfaces and prevent precipitation and runoff from infiltrating soils. Therefore, as impervious cover increases, infiltration decreases and runoff increases. With an increase in runoff, a variety of hydrologic and chemical changes can occur within a watershed. For instance, water chemistry and quality are impacted because urban and industrial development often generate more pollutants. The impervious cover model on the right shows the average percentages of impervious cover at which water quality and watershed functions begins to decline. The majority of the literature suggests that adverse changes occur when impervious cover within a watershed exceeds 10%. While impervious surface land cover data can be used in a variety of ways, one approach is to use it in conjunction with the impervious cover model. I use the impervious cover model to assess impacts of impervious surfaces on the water quality and the health of sub-watersheds within the three sub-basins of interest. I calculated the total area of impervious cover within each sub-watershed and assigned it to one of the impervious cover model classes. In the figure to the right, sub-watersheds with greater than 5% impervious cover are labeled. As you can see, there are several sub-watersheds in the Jordan subbasin that are classified as non-supporting. This area corresponds to the highly urbanized area within the Salt Lake Valley. In this second example, object-based image analysis was used to develop a high-resolution land cover data set for the Price River Riparian Corridor in central Utah. This project was funded by the Bureau of Land Management, the United States Geological Survey, and the Utah Division of Wildlife. A high-resolution land cover data set for the Price River was identified as an integral component of restoration planning and management. The Price River has increasingly become dominated by invasive plant species such as tamarisk. With an increase of invasive plant species, hydrological and geomorphic changes have occurred that have impacted water quality and native fish species. A riparian land cover classification with 12 classes was created for the Price River Riparian Corridor. By using high-resolution aerial imagery and object-based image analysis, the distribution and extent of invasive species, as well as important stands of native species such as cottonwoods, were identified. This riparian land cover dataset is currently being used to support targeted habitat restoration efforts that improve the integrity of native communities. Through a separate grant from the America View program, I decided to build upon the previous work and evaluate the historic river conditions and riparian land cover distribution of the Price River. I found some historic aerial photos of the area from 1938. I georeferenced them and developed a general land cover classification. I then compared the current land cover data to the historic aerial photos and the classification from 1938. This assessment indicated that the Price River Riparian Corridor has undergone substantial changes between the two time periods. Historically, the Price River was a wide, shallow, and meandering river with very little vegetation on the banks. It is presently a narrow, incised, and sediment-filled channel dominated by tamarisk. In this final example, object-based image analysis has been and is currently being used to develop high-resolution urban land cover data sets for WaterMAPS. Since this example is most pertinent to the seminar series, I will go into a little more detail about the process that is used to create the land cover data. As noted in the December seminar, WaterMAPS is a custom water demand management tool that is being used to promote and guide urban landscape water conservation. Dr. Joanna Endter-Wada in the Department of Environment and Society at Utah State University leads the WaterMAPS program and team. For more information, you can check out the WaterMAPS website. Our current partners are the Salt Lake City Department of Public Utilities and Eagle Mountain City. To develop high-resolution urban land cover classification for WaterMAPS analyses, a variety of freely available data sets are used. The aerial imagery that is used is from the National Agriculture Imagery Program, or more commonly known as NAEP. NAEP aerial imagery is acquired during the agricultural growing season under the direction of the USDA Farm Service Agency. It generally has a spatial resolution of 1 meter, so we consider that high resolution. For Utah, NAEP aerial imagery is available for 8 different years, beginning in 2003. The most recent imagery was acquired in 2018. NAEP aerial imagery includes red, green, blue, and near-infrared bands. The addition of the near-infrared band provides for greater visual interpretation and digital analysis. It enables the development of vegetation indices, such as the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. LiDAR data is used to develop normalized digital surface models. These models depict the height of features relative to the ground and allow differentiation between taller vegetation types, such as trees, from ground-based vegetation, such as grass. Other data sets, such as building footprints, road center lines, and water-related land use, can support rule set development and improve classification accuracy. Lastly, parcel boundaries, which are provided by our current partners, are used to focus in on the parcels of interest, whether it be residential parcels or city-owned parks or commercial properties. The urban land cover classes for WaterMAPS analyses are somewhat limited by the aerial imagery. Since NAPE imagery includes only 4 bands, there is difficulty in identifying specific vegetation types. So for now, the general classes include agriculture, barren, grass, impervious, riparian, sparse vegetation, trees and shrubs, and water. While most of these classes are fairly straightforward, I will comment on a few of them. In terms of agriculture, there are some remaining agricultural parcels within Salt Lake City and Eagle Mountain. This class is not used very often, but there are some instances where an agricultural plot is located near or within a parcel of interest. Barren lands includes those that are devoid of vegetation. These can include dirt roads, gravel areas, or even gravel pits. In WaterMAPS analyses, the most common barren areas are those in subdivisions where the land has been cleared and leveled for new construction. This is very common in newer cities such as Eagle Mountain. Sparse vegetation is another class that needs some clarification. Sparse vegetation refers to those areas where there's minimal or senescent vegetation. It can include xeriscaped yards, vegetable gardens, and perhaps yards that have minimal landscaping or have not been maintained. As we continue to work on these projects, we are improving upon the number of classes and their definitions as the imagery permits. So as shown in that example of coral pink sand dunes, after the data are prepared for use in E-Cognition and the classes are identified, the aerial imagery is segmented. Once the image is segmented into meaningful image objects, a series of rules are developed to classify the imagery. Rules about object properties are created to assign each segment to one of the land cover classes. The rule set on the right is just an excerpt of the Salt Lake City land cover classification. While the aerial imagery, ancillary data, and classification rules produce detailed high-resolution land cover classifications, there are certain limitations that can be expected as a result of the data inputs and methods. For example, narrow or small features such as sidewalks may not be classified correctly, or the perimeters of structures may have some error, or even shadows can cause some issues. Therefore, the classification needs to be edited to improve accuracy, or alternatively, an acceptable level of error is permitted. In the instance of WaterMAPS analyses, manual editing procedures are implemented to improve the accuracy of the results. While the original output would be more than acceptable at coarser scales, such as a large neighborhood or city, manual editing needs to be conducted at these finer scales due to the fact that the unit of assessment is the individual parcel. So through manual editing, a higher level of accuracy is achieved in order to generate quality WaterMAPS results. After manual editing has been completed, an accurate high-resolution land cover data set has been created that can be used as an integral input in WaterMAPS analyses. These land cover data provide valuable information about the composition, distribution, and area of different land cover types. Each of the vegetation land cover types are assigned a plant factor value based on estimated water use. For instance, grass is assigned a higher plant value because it uses more water. WaterMAPS integrates parcel data, land cover data, water meter data, and weather data into one database, and then calculates and geographically displays a measurement called a landscape irrigation ratio. Landscape irrigation ratios are calculated from estimated landscape water use and estimated landscape water need. Landscape irrigation ratios indicate which landscapes are potentially being overwatered and thus identify where the greatest capacity to conserve exists. So hopefully these examples illustrate the importance and value of evolving mapping techniques and high-resolution land cover datasets. As indicated, these projects are applied and these data sets are actively being used by natural resource managers and city officials to support restoration and conservation. Thank you for your time, and we will now entertain questions and comments.